Hello, all listeners, young to old. Welcome to the first episode of Whatever Happened To, the podcast that tells you all about where that niche trend went that you haven't thought about in years. I'm your host, Rami Alarian, and today we are going to talk about the rise and fall of over-the-top animal comedies. Now, I want you to humor me for a second. Think of Hollywood. Classic Hollywood, an environment of competitive, animalistic beings constantly fighting one another for resources, continually dominating one another in order to survive, just to make it out on top, where the tops and the kings dominate and adapt, keeping the little guys down until they evolve. Seems familiar, right? It seems parallel to something that's too natural. The ecosystem. In fact, I'm seeing so many parallels between Hollywood and the ecosystem, so much so that animals and the outdoors have been influencing Hollywood and our screens for longer than we could remember, seeping into our media like it's nothing. Now, let me jog your memory if you're not thinking of a couple examples yourself. Do you guys remember these films, maybe? Zookeeper with Kevin James, Dr. Dolittle with Eddie Murphy, Ace Ventura, Pet Detective with Jim Carrey, The Animal with Rob Schneider, and Kangaroo Jack with, whoever's in Kangaroo Jack. My point is that there's a good amount of these classic over-the-top animal comedies, and I'm not done just there, because there's a whole section of animal comedies just surrounding dogs. Marmaduke, Turner and Hooch, the entire Beverly Hills Chihuahua series. You think I'm done? There's a section of animal comedies just surrounding the actor Brendan Fraser. Furry Vengeance, George of the Jungle. He even had The Whale. Now, what if I told you that the most recent of all the animal comedy movies I just mentioned came out in 2012? 13 years ago, when I was 8 years old. I'm 22 now. It almost seems surprising, right? I mean, where do these niche types of media go? This very specific subsection of film seemed like it just vanished, fell off the face of the earth. I mean, as a senior in college, it almost seems dumbfounding to me that this very prevalent genre of comedy movies fizzled out and died with barely a trace. Not only so suddenly, but so long ago. And I think about it, and you as the listener, I know you're thinking about it too, the fact that we wouldn't want to watch a movie like that made today. I'm thinking about the movies that I just mentioned. I'm thinking about Zookeeper with Kevin James. Well, that might be interesting, but there's some classics like Zookeeper, Dr. Dolittle. I hear that Ace Ventura is completely outdated. Kangaroo Jack suffers from a CGI nightmare. The Animal with Rob Schneider, the comedy wasn't good back then. I mean, all these comedies almost seem so surprising. I wouldn't want to watch them today. If one of them was made today, it wouldn't sell. And the fact that we wouldn't want to watch these movies made today, it speaks volumes. We know that this form of comedy got stale. That's the truth. Comedy trends change. Not everybody is laughing at slapstick Chaplin, Keaton, and the Three Stooges like they used to, and nobody is laughing at over-the-top animal comedies like they used to. But why? Well, let's look at the history. Let's start with Charlie Chaplin, who we were speaking about earlier. Many consider the foundational animal comedy movie is a 1918 Chaplin movie called A Dog's Life. It was a silent film, obviously, following Chaplin's classic tramp character and a stray dog teaming up for misadventures. Many say that this set the stage for animal comedies. Now, I watched it. I went ahead and I took the liberty of watching A Dog's Life, so you guys didn't have to. And what did I find? I found that it wasn't as over-the-top as you would think. Despite the fact that it did lay the foundation for these over-the-top animal comedies I mentioned earlier, I would say that I could understand why it influenced these ones, but, it didn't seem as closely related as I thought. The animal comedies that I'm talking about are too over the top. When it comes to Chaplin in this movie, he relied on physical and situational humor a lot, right? The tramp character has emotions. This dog and the Chaplin duo aren't going on adventures as an anthropomorphic creature and a human. They went on adventures as a dog and a man. So what I'm trying to say here is that there was an emotional or a more serious element to it all. Jokes were subtle and expressive. They were grounded. It wasn't as shocking as the animal comedy movies that we saw back in the early 2010s. The jokes weren't as indulgent in themselves. In fact, both of them kind of dove into expressiveness. But the antics are different when it comes to the early 2000 animal comedies. It was big on loud and fast and absurd. The things were more high energy. The jokes that they were taking on were too over the top. It was less like a dog doing dog things and more like a dog voiced by a human man. These 2000 animal comedies were big on gross out humor and pop culture jokes, shock humor even. Kangaroo Jack is a caricature of a hip-hop culture, but if it was in Australia, all played by a man in a kangaroo CGI SFX costume. If that doesn't sound like a little too much to you, then I'd be surprised. The comedy was not subtle. The animals in these comedies either were the joke or they were telling the joke. In Chaplin's comedy, the animal was in a situation that was the joke. It's the difference between situational comedy and shock factor, loud, random comedy. Random is easier. The stuff that Charlie Chaplin was doing, it's not as easier. Well, now that we analyze the comedy of each and shown that there's very clear differences in maybe just a regular animal comedy and these over-the-top animal comedies that we saw in the 2000s, I have a couple theories. Number one, and the most obvious, animal rights. My first thought ever when it came to loss of animal comedy is animal rights. There's a fairly big backing when it comes to people who don't support working animals for these productions. Of course, from a money standpoint, I bet the studios have no problem with this, because there are a lot more precautions and there's a lot more money that pools into the production when a real animal is on set. The American Humane Association, or the AHA, monitors the treatment of animals in filmed media. If you see a no animals were harmed seal at the end of a program, maybe a TV show or a movie, it shows that the AHA ensured the humane treatment of all the animal actors in the film or the TV show. Currently, there are no laws protecting animals in movies at all. Now, here's the interesting part. In 2013, The Hollywood Reporter ran a story that implied that the AHA was turning a blind eye to certain incidents of animal abuse on sets, but specifically when it came to big studio productions. This came out because of a Hobbit movie, The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey. 27 animals died. And guess what? Guess what was shown at the end of the flick? That's right, a no animals were harmed disclaimer. And that's not all. In Life of Pi, the tiger, or king as he's named, nearly drowned in a pool, and the incident wasn't even reported. And guess what was shown at the end of the flick? That's right, no animals were harmed. You know, I find it interesting that their validity was tarnished in specifically 2013, because that's when I would argue that distinction of animal comedy format dropped. This is the year where some of the youngest over-the-top animal comedy movies that I mentioned earlier were born. The last of its breed. I believe that studios started looking for substitutes, and with CGI and animation consistently evolving, I believe they turned to new mediums. Now, some might argue that animal substitutes are inauthentic. But that's the thing about it all. Animal substitutes are one of the biggest factors that killed over-the-top animal comedies, which brings me into my second point. The second theory as to why animal comedies that are so over the top have fallen ill to a graveyard is because of CGI and animation. Practical effects and puppetry increasingly became not viable options, and real trained animals made these movies feel a little more grounded in their absurdity. CGI made everything corporate. and efficient. Studios began to rely on this hyper-realistic animation. With the rise of this technology, people weren't looking for goofy talking animals with exaggerated expressions. No, they wanted the real deal. The comedy lost its quirky and physical charm because things started looking uncanny. Animation and CGI got so good, in fact, that when looking at these past projects with real animals or anything of the sort, it seemed to already be behind in the production. But that form was paramount to the animal comedy production. Technology took animal comedies to their grave. It's like how people aren't doing black and white Steamboat Willie animation anymore. And therefore, a lot of comedy that existed in that format, in that animation, died out when new ways to animate came about. Because imagine hyper-realistic CGI monkeys stealing things, pulling pranks, outsmarting humans, peeing on someone. It just seems off. With this new medium, the new technology, it got uncanny to make those kinds of jokes. So when the technology changed, so did the comedy. And that brings me into my third point. My third theory is that comedy changed entirely. Let's talk about how this comedy came to be. Over the top and gross out humor fizzled out. Comedy trends shift. People are really big on more self-aware humor now. Even meta is shifting out these days. Meta humor. If you want shock humor, you go on the internet. So when I go to the movies, I kind of expect an upgrade. Anybody and their moms can make that kind of comedy that was popular for millennials. People began to want comedy that makes a statement. There's criticism to be made about the world right now. I don't want to watch a funny monkey pull some dude's hair out and leave bananas all over the place. And I will admit too, I think the 90s were a gross time in general. Raunchiness has been on the decline since. I mean, looking at examples, there's Jackass, Garbage Pail Kids, Shrek, Dumb and Dumber. But why did this gross out humor leave? I mean, from a historical lens, looking at it, they got through much of their wars. In the 90s, it was just dropping bombs in the Middle East, and that was it. Until 9/11. Then dark humor or political satire or anything that was more intellectual wasn't really needed then. Therefore, it was a comedy made for people who didn't have to think too much. Rather, people who didn't really want to think too much. They didn't want to have to deal with the world and a reflection of it. They wanted absurd. They wanted animals doing stupid stuff. They wanted low-bar comedy with hardly any grounding, because it was an escape through and through. The world has only now left room for better and more important things to laugh at. Now people are finally ready, or rather they have been in the past few years. Animal comedies left because things got too serious in the real world. Well, now we know why animal comedy is here. And now we know why it's gone. What does it look like today? One great example is Animal Control. Animal Control is a TV show that started in 2023. And it's still ongoing. It stars Joel McHale, the dude who plays Jeff from Community. But, and of course there's a but, because my main theme for this episode is that over-the-top animal comedies are long dead. So my first but is that the show has real animals. They aren't over-the-top or human-like or personified in any big way, but they are real animals. This is still the closest thing I could find to the classics I talked about at the beginning of this episode. It still involves humans getting chumped by some animals and put into an unfortunate situation. But let me read the depiction of the show. A group of local animal control workers' lives are complicated by the fact that animals are simple, but humans are not. Well, that's not the theme of our classic animal over-the-top comedies. That's not the theme at all. That doesn't sound like a monkey is going to take a piss on Joel McHale in this TV show. It sounds like a comedy sitcom set in an animal control facility. Now let's talk about another example. The Wild Robot came out last year and got 3 Oscar nominations. Flo just came out last year and got nominated twice and won 1. Animal comedy movies are never leaving. That is a fact. They are just never coming back in the same way. Not the same way that they did long ago. People want animals to act like animals nowadays. Kind of like what I was talking about when it came to Chaplin's flick. Now people value animation. They value a more serious comedy. They don't want animals put through perilous situations. There isn't a market for that anymore. They want a higher bar for comedy. Gross out and shock factor humor just isn't funny anymore. If you loved this sort of comedy, don't get your hopes up. This is what I'm trying to get at. You gotta go to a zoo, you gotta tap into the Monterey Bay live streams, or pick at a Nat Geo magazine. But if you loved over-the-top 2000s animal comedy movies, you just aren't getting them back for now. And listeners, we just got a little older ourselves in the past 10 or so minutes. Remember to stay curious and stay relevant, y'all. If you love this episode, you will go crazy for the next. We'll be diving deep into the world of your hair down there and how certain grooming habits started and how they got laid to rest. Because on this podcast, we talk about every trend, no matter how niche or odd, and analyze the history of how it all came to be and how it all came to leave us. Catch me at Rami Alarian on Instagram and catch the show on Spotify and YouTube. I hope you remember to listen to next week's episode, or you might be asking yourself, whatever happened to... And that's our show. And I'm your host, Rami Alarian. If it ain't monkey business, I don't want to prove it. Bye-bye, y'all.